All right, guys, what's going on? It's Andre with AndreReese.Biz. All right, man, I did a cardinal sin here. I went ahead and started recording. I didn't turn my microphone on, so I'm just going to go ahead and just do these last two topics by themselves, and I'll pick the other two topics up, another time. But the two topics I'm going to talk about is actually, let me just go ahead and just start on the one topic. Actually, I'll do two. So I've got plenty of time to be able to do that. And maybe I might roll into the other ones. It all really depends. But I'm going to talk about moving from the boonies and living in the city. What's that like? And then I'm also going to talk about what brings me peace. And so I was previously saying that let's just jump into the peace topic. What brings you peace? And so I was talking about, I originally had this topic to discuss. I've got a really, really long list of topics that pop into my head, or I might see something in a movie or whatever. And some of these topics, I might marinate for a while because they might be a little bit more current. And I know that there's another iteration of it coming out, so I'll just wait until that actually ultimately happens. But this topic here, we go to a church locally out here, and it's a typical church plant that you're going to find throughout, Christian organization throughout the U.S. And there's a snake down there. Whew. Watch out for his ass. And it's a typical, I think that's the first snake I've ever seen out here. Not a big one. I don't have no idea what he is, but I'm not hanging around to find out either. So, but yeah, a typical church plant, Christian. You're going to find that there's a formula that they use when they start a church someplace, as far as like the leadership team and how they act and the worship, procedure and protocol and everything else that kind of goes along with that. And this was not really much different than any other Christian organization you're going to find. I've gone to a number of different churches throughout the U.S., more modern ones, more recent, throughout Canada, and also other places in the world. And the formula is very, very similar. So I'm not here to criticize the formula in any kind of way. I say once you figure out what works, stick with it and keep tweaking it. So it definitely does work. But one of the things that they do is when they first start the service, they usually have singing. There's usually about usually three songs that they have. Service is usually right about an hour, very exact in its timing. And they will sing 3 different songs, and usually in intensity and tempo, everything starts to increase, as they get to the 3rd song. All good. You want to kind of build up to stuff and have a crescendo in the end. That's the way pretty much everything is in the world. You always want to end on a high note. And so before everybody sits down, they always have like a 2 minutes to talk, where they put a question up on the board and on the screen, which allows people to ask the question of people that are in the church. All good. And so what typically happens is, when people arrive, they'll do their thing. And, a lot of times people's complaint, especially with larger churches, is that, things can feel a little bit daunting and alienating. So this is kind of a good way to get multiple people involved and feel a little bit more at home in how they go about, having a service. Great, all good, it definitely works. And so one of the services we were at sometime last year, I don't even remember, but the question was, what brings you peace? And so the idea is, in this 2 minutes, you're supposed to turn around and talk to your neighbor in front of you or behind you. People kind of find their way naturally, or somebody on the right side or left side of you. And it gives you a chance to hear something and how people kind of think and what their thought process is. And most importantly, it allows you to you know, kind of step out your comfort zone and have a chance to kind of talk and maybe meet some people. And they always talk about that there's significant, really cool stories that have come out of these 2 minutes to talk, where folks will ultimately, you know, meet their new best friend, or, you know, some people have met neighbors and they didn't know it, you know, and so it's a good way to try to build community and get to know and meet some new people. And a lot of people these days have a very difficult time and challenge trying to do that, so it helps in that manner. And so one day they asked the question, they said, what brings peace to you? And I think it was somewhere probably towards the holidays or whatever it might have been. And of course, everybody's got a different answer, you know, about it. But I remember the person I was talking to, he was fairly new, and me and Marilyn were talking to him. And you know, Marilyn gave her answer, the guy gave his answer, and I went last, and I said, what brings peace to me is just being at home, enjoying time with my wife, and just traveling and having conversations and laughing and, you know, all that type of stuff. That is very, very peaceful to me. And I think this is kind of a very important question that we should all answer and have written out. And I talk about this all the time. I have a manual that if I want to, and it took me years to develop this thing. It essentially goes over everything from my personality to the things I like and what I don't like, what's acceptable, what's not, what I'll tolerate, what I won't. It talks about my characteristics. It talks about, you know, my greatest selling points and all that. It has my goals, all that in there. And so during that process of trying to figure all this stuff out, I really found out what brings me happiness and what gives me joy, and what also gives me peace is all included in the manual, you know. And I think it's important for all of us to consider doing an exercise like this about ourselves. And if you ever look at any of my posts and details, I always start out by saying, find joy in life, and your life will be epic. And so what is joy? So I think there's, it's a deeper level of happiness. It's more of a consistent hum. And it takes a long time to be able to find joy. And example, a lot of people will say, well, I just want to be happy. Well, if you bought a brand new Ferrari, you've always wanted one, you get it, you'll be happy for about 3 weeks. And then you're in search of that next dopamine hit. Or you might want a Birkin bag so you can floss on Instagram, you know, or just because you deserve one, whatever it might be, you know, that might bring you happiness. But after you get that, you want to get the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So it's kind of like a circular thing. And if you get the Ferrari, next thing you want to get a Lambo. Just keeps going on and on and on. But somebody that drives a 1982 Toyota Tercel might be extremely happy with their old beat up car, you know, and have more joy with it than you do with your Lambo or your Birkin bag. And so, like I said, it's all about developing, you know, happiness is good. I get happy all the time. I think I find happiness all the time because I have a certain amount of joy that's in my heart. I am happy with myself. I'm comfortable with myself. I accept all the good things that have happened to me in my life and all the bad things in my life. And so when I'm quiet and I sit still, I don't have all the demons that a lot of people have haunting them. And it can be your childhood, it can be your choices in relationships, it can be, you know, who your family members are or close relatives, it can be situations that have happened at work, you know, whatever it might be, things that oftentimes go unresolved. So like I said, I don't have those things that I have to constantly deal with. And if I lay still and quiet, I think happy thoughts, you know, and I enjoy planning my future, and we always have a roster of things that we're going to be doing in the next year. You know, we're both on the same page of things that we want to do and what we want to accomplish and things that we want to see. And so it gives us the ability to look forward to the future. And if things aren't so happy today, I think probably the most discouraging thing that happens to me is tax season, you know, especially like the last 2 weeks. It is a grind and a hustle, but in the end, it's something I have to go through in order to get to the next level. But in the core, I really enjoy helping people. I really enjoy saving folks money and providing guidance to them when times are the darkest. And those are the kind of things that keep me going. And my wife has only known me, and I know there's a ton of folks out there that have tax and accounting businesses. I've ran into a number of them. A lot of folks, they'll let for 4 months, and maybe it might be on purpose, who knows, but they'll let 4 months of their life dry up and disappear because, you know, of tax season. They'll unplug with their spouses, they'll unplug with their family, you know, they do crazy and ridiculous hours, you know, because they don't necessarily have boundaries. And maybe they do have boundaries, but they don't want the boundaries because it allows them to, you know, find some isolation. Because a lot of us people that, we're all, a lot of us accountants, we're all introverts. So we love to be by ourselves. You know, sometimes society says you should do something, but you may not really truly want to do it. You just want to just kind of be by yourself. And, you know, sometimes that's the situation that happens with people. Not that big of a deal, but like I said, it's one of those things where you have to really take the time to find out what is really truly bothering you and do something about it. And if you're the kind of person that complains all the time, you find comfort in complaining and not trying to evolve the situation, you'll never be able to move to the point where you will be able to deal with a fine happiness, which will lead to the next level of joy. And then once you have achieved joy, you will find peace. You know, and so like I said, it was a very profound question to ask everybody, and a lot of people talked about a lot of things, but I think the most important thing for all of us to do is to occasionally do an exercise. You know, when the seasons change, or with me, I always have a deep soul search 3 times a year, really. And one is around the end of the year, when I'm trying to get myself together for the next tax season, and you kind of slow down a little bit to hang out with family and holidays, and or family and friends during the holidays, all that. Another time I have a deep soul search and realignment is around my birthday, or on my birthday. And then always, every single tax season, when it ends in a capitulation of joy, relaxation, time off, reconnection, being able to do things, you know, again, that I really hadn't been able to do. And, you know, and I get a lot of inspiration for what I'm gonna do in the whole new year. And then just kind of backtrack a little bit. I didn't mention it, but, you know, my wife said this year, she says, you know what, you are just as busy, if not busier, but you can't really tell. And she says you seem to be a lot more at ease and, you know, willing to walk away and, you know, do some stuff and whatever. And I said, you know what, this is exactly what I've been building for. I said, this is really truly the first year where I have everything that I need. You know, I've got my space, I've got faster computers, I've got my monitors, I've got, you know, all the technology. I've gotten everything set up where I can work anywhere in the world. My process works. I've trained my clients so they understand. I've been a lot more strict and heavy about, you know, stoppage deadlines and points where I just don't do any more work. And I said, the most important thing is that you've been here to really, truly, you know, support me and make sure that I'm okay, you know? And even if it's something as simple as bringing me a glass of water or a bowl of snacks or whatever, you know, that's really, really cool, you know? And I said, I'm, you know, happy and thankful for being where I am. And I'm at a great spot in my life right now where I have intense peace. So like I said, if you want to get to the point where you have peace in life, you have to be really happy and accepting of where you are, and you have to realize that more doesn't necessarily give you anything emotionally and mentally that you don't already have already. And so a lot of it is just accepting what you got and what you've done and what you've created, and realizing that the most important thing in life is experiences and being able to do things with friends and family and all that, you know. So that's kind of where I am with the whole thing. And I encourage you guys to try to see if you can get there as well. So remember, it starts out with being appreciative and happy and thankful. And then from there, you know, you're going to expand into having an underlying level of joy. And from that point, you're going to be able to achieve peace. And you have to really take the time to figure out 4 or 5 things in your life that bring you the most joy, and try to interweave that stuff into your life as much as possible. And a lot of that will come around your purpose and things you like to do. And with me, every day from my manual, there's certain things that I find happiness from, and my day is just filled with it constantly. That's everything from traveling, local, domestic, being outside, going to events, you know, listening to live music, you know, spending time with Marilyn and us doing things together, you know, and then career-wise, helping folks. And so what I do every day, I'm not necessarily providing, you know, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, you know, literally, but a lot of people, I'm saving their lives, and that brings me a lot of joy. So that's it for this topic, and I'll go ahead and jump on to the last one here real quick. So what's the last topic we're going to talk about? Oh yeah, okay. So the last topic is moving, what the difference between living in the boonies versus living in town. And so me growing up, you know, I've always bought into the mentality that more is better. And so you want to be able to have people come over to your house and pull up to the driveway, and they're just astonished by the outside of your home. You know, they are in awe, and there's certain things that you can do to show people that you're doing well. So you have the pedigree, which can be the education. You can have the job with a certain title. You got a wonderful home. You know, you got picture perfect, you know, children. And then you also have, you know, a great career that you may be, like I think I already said that already. Great career you're working at, wonderful cars, you know, all that type of stuff. And this is the thing. All that stuff in the United States is very expensive. And if you leave the United States, and we've had this conversation before, when we came back from Ghana traveling, I was like, we were on the plane. I said, baby, we are on the struggle bus here in the US. I said, if we just took $3,000 a month and moved, you know, to Ghana, I said, we can have a compound, we can have a cook, we can have somebody that cleans the home, we can have a driver, we can, you know, move back and forth between social circles, where if you wanted to have that type of a lifestyle here in the States, you know, it's, you're talking several $1 million a year that you would need to earn to be able to pay everybody, you know. And so one of the hacks that people have is like, well, let me go move to the boonies. And so when you move to the boonies, it's not near the jobs, it's not near the excitement. It's usually outside of the city area. And these are regions where you are required to have a car or multiple cars. You're going to spend long times, you know, in commuting, you know, etc. And then so when I lived in the Bay Area, I remember I had finished college, and I used to take BART to work, and it was around 2000 is when I started working at one of the large CPA firms that were global. And at that time, the .com boom was just going like crazy. And so it was hard to find housing, it was hard to find, everything was just expensive, it seemed like. And if you wanted to get, you know, an apartment and rent it, there were waiting lists for the waiting list for the waiting list. And it just was ridiculous time in the Bay Area to try to live and survive, you know. And I ended up, you know, one day I was on BART, and I think I lived in the Hayward, San Leandro area at the time, and I needed to move because the place that I was living in, they had the rent went up like 40 or 50% is what it was. And they were able to do that back then because people were willing to come and put it all on the line to be able to get a job at one of these .coms and become a .com millionaire. That was just the thing. And so one day I'm sitting on BART and I'm looking, and I see, for the first time, I realized why BART existed. I saw that all of the trains that they had, no matter where they came from, Daly City, Richmond, Fremont, you know, Pittsburgh, Bay Point, they all ran through San Francisco. And there was a couple areas where you can easily transfer between the trains as you got more in town. You know, all good. That's what the transit system is there for. And I knew all the places in the Bay Area were very expensive. So I saw that there was Pittsburgh, Bay Point at the end of the line, out in eastern Contra Costa County. And I went home that evening, and I think I got on the computer and started looking at places to rent. And I was like, wow, the rent out here is so much cheaper than it is to be able to rent in the Bay Area, in the heart of the Bay Area, like Oakland, immediate East Bay, you know, all that type of stuff. And so I was like, okay. So I think on one Saturday, I think I had called a couple places, and they said, oh yeah, they had plenty of space available. I was like, okay, cool. So I rode out there one weekend, immediate weekend after that. And when I was riding out there, I was like, God damn, it is so far. I said, am I still even in California? You know, the weather changed and the temperature went up. But when I got out there, I was like, wow, this is a whole different world out here. And but there were abundance of places to rent. The rent was a fraction of what it was in the Bay Area. And I was like, well, I can still work my way into the city by taking BART, you know? And so the thing is, whatever decision you make today is gonna affect you for a long time. And just because you are working at a job today that is close to BART doesn't mean a year from now, the way things are, that you're still gonna be working at that job. So if you end up going someplace else, that perfect scenario that you set up, you know, is gonna officially fall apart. So I ended up moving out to the area, finding a place, and living out there. And then I vowed that, and I signed a 6-month lease. And I said in 6 months, I'm going to end up, buying a place. And so I ended up doing that. And so I think I changed employers, and being in the accounting world, you have to move around and go to different clients. So sometimes you can take BART and other times you got to drive. But I remember there were many, many times where I had, lived out there, and I had to get into the city, and the bridge would break, and it would take, typically, it would take about 2 hours each direction to drive in. If it was a Friday, it was a low traffic day, or, a day leading up to a holiday, because it was going to be on a Tuesday or something. It might take like an hour and a half to get into the city from where I was each direction. So you figure somewhere, just say on average, anywhere between 3 and 4 hours of each day is dedicated. How you doing? 3 or 4 hours of each day is dedicated to commuting back and forth. So I learned to listen to a lot of different music and different things on talk radio, and all kinds of stuff. Different television or different radio shows. I was a connoisseur of all the stuff, and I would listen to it. Then they had podcasts. I would listen to tons of podcasts. So I used the time as productively as possible. Sometimes I'd call people on the phone and talk to them for like an hour or whatever it might have been, relatives or friends I hadn't talked to in a while. So I tried to use the time, as much as possible whenever I could use the time. So, but I'll tell you, there is a difference. And so, make a long story short, I eventually left East Contra Costa County and ended up moving over onto the peninsula to the Redwood City area. And just to kind of give you a little background, when you're out in Contra Costa County, you're going to have a lot of strip malls that have like all the popular stores that are chain-based. You're going to have a lot of chain-based restaurants. You're going to have a lot of chain-based stores that are large and all that. And if you move into an area that has all that stuff there, there's no guarantee that all that stuff is going to stay. And when you have super, super large businesses that go out and go under, and they leave vacant stores, 1 or 2 or 3 of those during a downturn can really affect, the property prices. And I remember during the housing crash, everywhere in the Bay Area, the prices went down significantly. I mean, they went down, down, down. San Francisco was hit hard. We were hit even harder. And when things started to eventually recover 2 or 3 years later, we didn't. And it took years and years and years for the prices to even creep back up to the point where, it was even viable. And I remember the place I had bought, I think I paid like $790 for it. I got some upgrades and all that. It was like a 6-bedroom, 5-bath house, and mini McMansion, really good builder and all that. A lot of great features in the place. And after I had purchased it, the house had went up in the pre-housing boom. They were selling for over $1 million. And then during the crash, when they had all the homes that were being liquidated and foreclosed, and just was blood in the streets, the same equivalent model that I had went down to about $335, which was absolutely crazy. And it probably took like another 10 years before it even got up to the point where it was even close to what I had originally paid for it. As a matter of fact, when I ended up selling the house just before the pandemic, I think it was like 2018 or 19, one of those times, just before the pandemic hit, I think I ended up selling the house for like $720. So after owning it for, I think I bought it in 2005, and then selling in 2019. So after having a house for 15 years, living in the boonies, I sold the house for less than what it was worth. So the only thing that saved was the amount of money that was put down when it was purchased, along with paying down the mortgage along the way. But I didn't get the appreciation like everybody else did. And so that was definitely one drawback about living out in the boonies. And then the other thing too is when things really started to hit really bad, there's a lot of stores that closed, a lot of stores that went out of business, and a lot of big locations that consolidated. And so it almost made like areas where there were just widespread businesses that were gone. And some of these malls that you would go into, or strip malls, they might only have a total of like 15, 20 stores in there, but sometimes like half of the stores were vacant and empty, and so it's definitely not good. So I was lucky enough to finally be able to sell and move out. And I had said to myself, I said, what, that was the second house I had owned. I said, I'm not ever going to own a house again. And I said, I'm not going to ever own a house again. And so when I moved out here to Richmond, Maryland lived in a very nice, historic, walkable neighborhood. I mean, you can literally leave and go to, walk to a restaurant, you can go to the post office. They had plenty of things that you can do, and, all the nice things that you would expect in a walkable neighborhood. And so, like I said, that was like the first time in my life that I've ever lived in that type of setup or situation. And I started to really appreciate the difference between, being able to just walk and do what you need to do, and having things close by, and having a real close, community, versus having to drive and commute. So it got to the point where we decided that we needed to get a new place. And I started looking at a lot of different options. I didn't really know a lot about Richmond out here and how it was laid out. So I would talk, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it is that we wanted. I would find different homes, and she would look at them and say, well, that works or that doesn't work. We decided that we ultimately, I didn't want to have to go back and do the thing where I'm dealing with yard work and being able to take care of the outside of the house and have to deal with that. I really appreciated the condo living, and I had a townhouse. That was the first place I had. I liked it that somebody else would do all the work, so we decided that was one of the key things that we wanted. And so we started looking around all over Richmond, and we looked in the city, we looked out of the city. There was a number of places where they were the exact same units, but if you went out of town, 20 minutes or 25 minutes, you would end up having to, saving like $50,000 or $75,000. So we went on a lot of those trips over several months where we were looking all around, and we were looking also in town as well. And we got to the point where it was like, I remember we went out one time, we drove out to Mosley. They got a beautiful golf course community out there, and it's wonderful. And it's some areas are gated, some are not, but and a lot of rolling hills and everything. And we were like, this would be a great place for us to walk and ride our bikes because of all the trails and the sidewalks and the streets and all that. But when we were driving back, Marilyn had asked me, she said, wow, when we were driving, she's like, how much longer before we get there? I said, you know what? The thing says like 15 minutes. She's like, wow. She said, are we still in Virginia? That's kind of like a funny inside joke. And I was laughing and cracking up with her. Said we still are. So we went and checked out the homes. They were beautiful, but on the way back, we were talking like, well, if we move out here, we will end up moving a long way away from her family. And anytime we want to do anything, we're going to have to get in the car and go. So the nice thing about this is it's got a, it's got a distant community. The community had some great features and all that. But in the end, we were going to really isolate ourselves. And from where we are in our lives, we're not trying to raise kids. We're not trying to, save as much money as possible. We're trying to have a good life where things are close by. And then also too, because we flew a lot, we would have to deal with the airport being a lot further away. And so there's a lot of different things that we kind of talked about. And so in the end, we decided, you know what? We want to live in town. And so I said, okay, cool, let's do that. Let's make that happen. And so we ended up looking at some places that were in the greater downtown area, and we found them, and we started looking at them in detail. And then the place that we live in now, it's right on the outskirts of that other area, but it is, you can see right behind me here, they are doing some significant amount of redevelopment out here in this area. It's just crazy what they're doing. And and in the end, like I said, we made the decision to live close to where everything is, and it benefits us whether we expect it or not. There's always things to do. We're close by. We only have one vehicle, and if we want to get to the action, we can walk to the action, or we can ride our bikes to the action. And it's definitely a huge benefit. So what's the purpose of all this? If you guys are considering between having a whole bunch and not having a lot, I would choose location over size, because it's much better to have a smaller location that's in the middle of stuff that you can easily do and make all that your living room or backyard, versus having a huge home that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and where the weather is a lot more extreme. It might be super hot or whatever, just so you can have the illusion of having a super large place. So that's it, guys. I got nothing else to talk about today. We got a graduation I got to go to, and I got to get upstairs and take a shower and get all that stuff done. So I appreciate you guys, as always, taking the time to hear me out. The other two topics I goofed up on, I'll take care of those another day. But take care, guys. Appreciate it. Peace. In my life. Oh, shit. Okay, my brother fell. This is black ice. Okay. All right, I'm okay. All systems check. All right, I'm good. So let me just penguin it.
Yeah.